This monstrous story, which took place in 2005, shocked all of Britain with its brutality. A young woman who by the age of 18 had already built a successful modeling career was found just 10 meters from the door of her own home. The police dedicated enormous resources to finding the person responsible, and it was a tiny DNA sample that ultimately helped them solve the case. Sally Anne Bowman was born on September 11, 1987, in London. She grew up in a large family with 3 older sisters. Her parents, Linda and Paul, later divorced, but she maintained a good relationship with her father. Sally was a cheerful and friendly girl with a big heart. She was also very responsible. As a teenager, she got a job and moved into a rented apartment, not wanting to be financially dependent on her parents, though she continued to see her family regularly. Sally later enrolled in the prestigious Brit School for Performing Arts and Technology in London. This school is famous for alumni like actor Tom Holland and singers Adele and Amy Winehouse. Sally dreamed of being a model, and getting into this school was a huge step toward her goal. After graduating in 2004, she worked for a time as a hairdresser and model. By January 2005, she had landed a job with the London modeling agency, Models One. From the very first month, Sally achieved impressive success. She became the face of the popular watch brand Swatch and participated in prestigious fashion shows. By the time she was 18, she had already built a very successful career. On Saturday, September 24, 2005, Sally went to visit her mother and spent most of the day at her house. Later, her older sister Nicole called and invited her to a birthday party for her best friend. Sally agreed and left her mother's house around 6 p.m., telling her she loved her as she left. At 10 p.m., Sally met her sister and friends at Lloyd's Bar in the center of Croydon. CCTV footage from the bar showed Sally having a great time as the group laughed, talked, and danced. Around 1 a.m., Sally left the bar with her sister. They walked to her sister's house, but Sally didn't stay long. On her way, she called her ex-boyfriend, Lewis Prosper Stone, and arranged to meet him in Croydon. At about 2:30 a.m., she took a taxi to meet him. During their meeting, they got into an argument. They had broken up just a few weeks earlier over mutual issues and had been trying unsuccessfully to sort things out ever since. Lewis decided to give her a ride home to Blenheim Crescent, and they continued to argue the entire way. The couple argued until about 4:15 a.m., at which point Sally got out of the car and headed for her home. Around the same time, neighbors were awakened by a strange noise followed by a scream. They rushed to their windows, but saw nothing suspicious on the street. About 5 minutes later, they saw an unknown man walking down the street. At about 6:30 a.m., a neighbor was leaving his house and noticed something odd. Sticking out from behind a nearby construction dumpster was what he first thought were the legs of a mannequin. But as he got closer, he was met with a horrific sight: the semi-naked body of a dead young woman. It was Sally Bowman. The police quickly arrived and cordoned off the area. They couldn't find a murder weapon, but forensic experts later found the DNA of an unknown male on the young woman's body. They also determined that Sally had been stabbed at least 7 times and had been sexually assaulted. The unknown attacker had even left several bite marks on her body. Sally's family was devastated by the news. When her mother heard a knock on the door that morning, she thought it was Sally coming home. But on her doorstep were police officers who informed her of her daughter's murder. Just a few hours later, Sally's mother and sister had to go to the morgue to identify the body. Until the very end, they hoped it was all a terrible mistake and that Sally was still alive. Only when they saw her body did they realize it was truly her. Meanwhile, the police began their investigation. The first thing they did was run the DNA sample from Sally's body through their databases, but this failed to identify the perpetrator. There were also no CCTV cameras in the area, which only complicated the investigation. Detectives determined that Sally was killed just 10 meters from her front door. Her walk from the car to the building was very short, meaning the attacker must have ambushed her almost immediately after she got out of the car. The police first suspected her ex-boyfriend, Lewis. He was the last person to see Sally alive, and she was murdered almost immediately after leaving his car. Furthermore, investigators learned that the couple argued frequently. On several occasions, the police had even been called, though no charges were ever filed. That same day, police tracked down and arrested Lewis. During questioning, he claimed he didn't even know Sally was dead until the detectives told him. He admitted that they had argued that night, but denied any involvement in her murder. According to his version of events, he drove away as soon as Sally got out of the car. Investigators were skeptical, as all the evidence seemed to point to him. He was held in custody for 4 days while detectives waited for the results of a DNA test. Ultimately, it was revealed that his DNA did not match the sample, and Lewis was released. At the same time, forensic experts made another interesting discovery. The DNA sample found on Sally's body had appeared in a criminal case 4 years earlier. In 2001, a woman was making a call from a phone booth in a store parking lot. At some point, a man entered the booth, exposed himself, and committed an indecent act. He didn't touch the woman and fled, but left his DNA on the floor of the booth. The victim reported it to the police, and the attacker's DNA sample was filed with the case. However, the perpetrator was never found. This incident had occurred just 2.5 kilometers away from where Sally was murdered. The police realized they were dealing with a serial offender who had been active for years. The only questions were, how many women had been victimized by this man, and when he would strike next. The detectives had to find him before he claimed another life. Soon, it became clear that the police's fears were justified. Just 1 hour before Sally's murder, a woman was attacked on a nearby street. She was walking home, talking on her cell phone. At some point, a man approached her, apologized, and then immediately struck her. The woman screamed and dropped her phone. But then something happened that the attacker clearly didn't expect. A taxi appeared on the road, which scared him off. He grabbed the victim's phone and fled. There's a chilling detail here. The person the woman was talking to was still on the line and heard everything, even after the attacker took the phone and disappeared. The victim's screams for help didn't fade. This meant he was hiding very close by, possibly hoping the taxi would drive past, leaving the victim at his mercy once again. Fortunately, the driver heard the screams and stopped. He got the woman into his car and took her to the hospital, where she called the police and reported what had happened. According to her description, the attacker was a white male, 25 to 30 years old, about 180 centimeters tall, with short, dark hair. Based on this information, the police created a composite sketch, which was published in the media. Unfortunately, this vague description fit a large number of men, and detectives received hundreds of calls from local residents. They all said the sketch looked like someone they knew, or that they had seen a similar-looking person somewhere. The police checked every single tip, but it led nowhere. Realizing the composite sketch wasn't going to help them find the attacker, investigators decided to try a different approach. Their only solid lead was the DNA sample found on the victim's body. Moreover, detectives were convinced the perpetrator lived in the area, supported by the fact that he had also attacked the woman in the phone booth on a nearby street. As a result, a decision was made to conduct a DNA screening of the entire neighborhood. Police officers had to go to every apartment and house, ask questions, and request that residents voluntarily provide their DNA samples. Of course, the detectives didn't expect the criminal to give them his DNA, but they hoped to get a sample from one of his relatives, which would bring them closer to catching him. For example, the man might be living with his parents, who were unaware of his crimes, and would willingly provide their DNA to the police. Over the next 6 months, police officers visited more than 6,000 addresses. Many residents provided their DNA samples, but the entire operation yielded no results. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, lab experts found no matches to the perpetrator's sample. All this time, the residents of Croydon lived in fear, and the police visits only heightened their anxiety. They all knew a predator was on their streets. Women were afraid to walk alone at night, and parents wouldn't let their children play outside. Eventually, the police had to go back to the composite sketch, as they had nothing else to work with. They contacted the woman who was attacked on the day of Sally's murder, as well as the victim from the phone booth. They were asked to describe the attacker's appearance again, and based on their statements, detectives created a revised version of the sketch. The police showed it at a press conference and, for the first time, revealed some details of the crimes that had been kept confidential. This was done in the hope that the people of Croydon would understand how dangerous this man was and would be more vigilant. Unfortunately, this also produced no results. The updated sketch wasn't much different from the previous one and was too generic, fitting thousands of men living in the area. But then, something no one expected happened. A completely random breakthrough in the case. A man was sitting in a pub, watching a football match. After having a bit too much to drink, he started arguing with another patron. And soon, their conflict escalated into a brawl on the street. Unfortunately for him, just as he pushed his opponent to the ground, a police officer was walking by. He arrested the man and took him to the station. That's when things got strange. The instigator of the conflict, 35-year-old Mark Dixie, began to panic and was on the verge of tears. This was a highly illogical reaction, as he had been arrested for a minor offense. It was likely his opponent wouldn't have even pressed charges, and the man could have simply gone home. The police found him very suspicious, but they soon had to release him on bail. Before they did, they followed standard procedure for all detainees. They took his fingerprints and a DNA sample. 12 days passed. The detectives received a call from the lab. The experts had a stunning announcement. Mark Dixie's DNA was a perfect match to the sample found on Sally's body. The investigators realized the dangerous predator had been in their hands, but they had let him go. In any case, the law wouldn't have allowed them to hold him any longer, and now the police had to arrest him again. Unfortunately for them, Dixie had fled to Amsterdam immediately after his release. The UK authorities issued a warrant for his arrest, but he remained a fugitive. This went on for 3 months, until something strange happened. The criminal had a falling out with his landlord in Amsterdam and returned to England. Moreover, he went back to his old job, making the police's work much easier. On June 28, 2006, almost a year after the murder, he was finally arrested, and this time charged with a series of serious crimes. Looking into his background, the police discovered that Mark had a very extensive criminal history. He committed his first crime in 1986, at the age of 16. He attacked a woman with a knife, robbed her, and sexually assaulted her. He was sentenced to just 6 months in prison due to his age. Every year after that, Mark was back in court for robbery and assault. In 1990, he was arrested for attacking a police officer. Unfortunately, each time the justice system was lenient with him. He would receive a short sentence and continue committing crimes. In 1993, he moved to Australia, where he picked up where he left off. 5 years later, he broke into a young woman's home, robbed her, and sexually assaulted her. He was later arrested for indecent exposure in a park. And in 1999, he was deported from the country. Unfortunately, in those years, the police were not yet collecting DNA samples from criminals, which is why Dixie's DNA from the murdered girl's body didn't show any matches in the existing databases. The police had a lot of work to do before they could take the case to court. They found out that on the night of Sally's murder, Dixie was celebrating his birthday at a pub with friends on Brighton Road, just a few hundred meters from her home. He had argued with his girlfriend on the phone and spent the rest of the evening abusing alcohol and illegal substances. He became withdrawn and barely spoke to anyone. After the pub closed, Mark and two of his female friends went to a nearby house. Waiting until they were asleep, he took a knife and went out onto the street. According to the investigation, he was the one who attacked the woman who was saved by the taxi driver. Fearing she would call the police, Mark moved to another street. Unfortunately, at that very moment, Sally Bowman got out of the car and headed toward her door. He attacked her, sexually assaulted. Mark Dixie's trial began on February 5, 2008. He refused to plead guilty, instead inventing a truly absurd story. According to his version, he was simply walking down the street and saw Sally lying on the ground. Taking advantage of the situation, he sexually assaulted her and left, claiming someone else had killed her. Dixie stated that he supposedly didn't know the girl was dead. During the trial, the woman from Australia whom Dixie had attacked in 1998 also came forward. He had sexually assaulted her and stabbed her 7 times, but had never been punished for it. The jury unanimously found Dixie guilty of Sally's murder, despite his ridiculous story. As a result, the court sentenced him to life in prison, with a minimum term of 34 years. After that, he was transferred between several prisons because fellow inmates would constantly bully and try to kill him. All this time, Mark continued to deny his involvement in the murder. It was only in 2015, 10 years later, that he finally confessed. His situation couldn't get any worse, but his confession allowed the police to link him to other crimes. In 2017, it was discovered that an innocent Dutch citizen had served 12 years in prison for attacks on 3 women in Spain, which were actually committed by Mark Dixie. In addition, the criminal also voluntarily confessed to another attack he had committed at the age of 16. Dixie had attacked a woman in a parking lot, sexually assaulted her, stole her credit cards, and set her car on fire. That same evening, he found her home phone number, called her, and began to taunt her. After this, the woman moved to a village as she couldn't cope with the trauma. In the same year, Dixie was found guilty of attacking 2 women in Croydon, for each of which he received another life sentence. 2017 was also marked by another sad event. Sally's family had to exhume her remains because unknown vandals were constantly desecrating her grave. The family decided to have her cremated and keep her ashes at home. After all these ordeals, Sally's mother has become a vocal advocate for a national DNA database. In her opinion, if the government were to collect DNA samples from all UK residents, similar crimes would be solved in a day, not 9 months. Furthermore, she was convinced that if the killer hadn't left his DNA at the crime scene, Sally's ex-boyfriend would have been sentenced to life in prison for a murder he didn't commit. The detective who led the investigation into Sally's murder supported the idea of a DNA database, but the government rejected it. In their view, the mandatory collection of DNA would violate basic human rights. This is a very complex issue. On one hand, such a database would indeed help solve similar crimes in a matter of hours. Moreover, some criminals might not even dare to commit a crime, knowing they could be identified very quickly. On the other hand, not every criminal leaves behind their DNA. Furthermore, a data leak from such a database, or its misuse, could genuinely harm law-abiding citizens. But what do you think? Are such databases necessary? Share your opinion in the comments and don't forget to rate this video if you liked it. Take care, and thanks for watching.